"This is where it all begins," Jason Cole whispered, his voice barely audible over the scrape of gravel under his boots as Blaze's paws clicked with steady determination ahead of him. The sun had just begun its slow ascent over the jagged horizon of the Mojave Desert, painting the sky with muted shades of pink and orange. But the warehouse before them was already swallowed by shadow, its corrugated metal walls warped and rusted, echoing the wind that howled across the empty lot. Dust swirled around their feet, catching in the thin morning light, and the scent of oil, mildew, and sun-baked concrete pressed against Jason's senses as he adjusted the strap of his pack. Blaze's amber eyes reflected the dim light, sharp and unyielding, and the dog moved with a fluid confidence that only came from years of training and trust. Jason followed, boots crunching, heart steady despite the tension crawling up his spine, every step measured, every breath mindful. The doors of the warehouse loomed taller than expected, hinges groaning as the dog nudged the first one open with a precise push of his nose. Inside, darkness stretched like a living thing, corners hidden in thick shadows, the faint echo of dripping water marking the silence with small, irregular beats. Jason inhaled slowly, tasting the dust and faint rust, letting it anchor him to the moment, while Blaze paused, nose twitching, ears pricked, catching something unseen. A faint whimper, almost drowned by the sighing wind through broken windows, reached Jason's ears. His hand instinctively brushed the side of his service weapon, not in anticipation of confrontation, but as a steadying gesture, a tactile reassurance. Blaze padded forward, low and deliberate, sniffing the cracked concrete floor and the smell of aged wood, signaling Jason to move with a soft nudge. The faint glimmer of sunlight caught on a shattered pane, revealing a narrow path between towering stacks of forgotten crates and abandoned pallets. The air was cooler here, damp and heavy, carrying the faint metallic tang of a long-forgotten leak. Jason felt the weight of silence pressing in, and for a heartbeat, it seemed the warehouse itself held its breath. Waiting. Blaze's paw tapped once, twice. Then he crouched slightly, body coiled, eyes fixed on a corner shrouded in darkness. Jason leaned closer, senses alert, and there, partially hidden beneath a tattered tarp, he glimpsed the curled figure of a man, eyes closed, breathing shallow, the rise and fall of his chest almost imperceptible. A bead of dust fell from the ceiling as Jason knelt beside him, speaking softly, words meant to reassure and anchor, not to startle. Blaze circled, tail low but steady, sniffing, his gaze never leaving the man, alert to any subtle sign of movement or danger. Jason's fingers brushed a cold hand, the touch sending a quiet shock through him, and he whispered again, "You're safe now. We're here." The man stirred slightly, eyelids fluttering open, confusion and fear mingling in a gaze that met Jason's own, and for a brief moment, time seemed suspended. Outside, the wind rattled the thin walls, carrying a distant cry of a bird, the only witness to the quiet miracle unfolding inside the dark expanse. Blaze nudged the man gently, a soft whine breaking the stillness, and Jason guided him toward the faint light that spilled from the open doorway. The world beyond the warehouse seemed impossibly far, yet every careful step was a reclaiming of life, a subtle triumph born of patience, instinct, and unwavering trust between man and dog. Dust motes swirled like tiny stars in the sunbeam as they moved, and Jason allowed himself a deep, grounding breath, feeling the rhythm of Blaze's steps echoing his own. In that moment, the bond, honed through missions and shared trials, shone quietly, a lighthouse in the dim interior, promising that even in the loneliest corners of the world, loyalty and courage could uncover miracles hidden in shadow. Jason guided the man carefully across the uneven concrete floor, each step deliberate, as Blaze circled ahead, ears twitching, alert to every shift in shadow and echo. The faint morning light filtering through broken windows painted patterns on the walls, and the dust hung thick, turning each breath into a measured inhale of grit and metallic tang. The man leaned heavily on Jason, his legs weak, but there was a flicker of awareness in his eyes that grew steadier with each step. Blaze paused at a stack of crates, nose to the floor, then looked back at Jason, eyes wide and expectant, signaling a direction that led to a side door barely hanging on its hinges. The wind outside whispered against the corrugated walls, carrying a distant bird call that seemed impossibly loud in the stillness, punctuating the silence like a heartbeat. Jason's boots made soft, echoing taps as he followed Blaze's guidance, careful not to startle the man beside him. Every step weighted with attention and the silent promise of safety. The air was cooler near the exit, carrying the scent of sun-warmed metal and the faint trace of desert sage from outside, blending with the odor of damp wood and dust. As they reached a small clearing within the warehouse, Jason spotted a toppled shelf, precariously leaning, and paused to steady it with his shoulder, just enough to create a clear path without disturbing the balance of the rest of the structure. Blaze nudged the man forward gently, whimpering softly, coaxing trust and reassurance with the language only they understood. Jason glanced down at the man, nodding encouragingly, and a weak smile formed on the man's lips, gratitude shining through the haze of fear and uncertainty. They advanced slowly, each movement synchronized, a quiet rhythm of determination and patience. The floor creaked under their weight, each sound amplified by the hollow space around them. And yet the man's confidence grew with every careful step, buoyed by Jason's steady voice and Blaze's unwavering presence. At the far end, near a shuttered window, Jason crouched slightly to help the man over a low pile of debris, Blaze lifting his head to signal that the path ahead was clear. The light through the broken panes revealed the man's expression softening, eyes tracing the contours of the dog and the Marine as if marking a sanctuary found in the midst of uncertainty. Jason breathed in the dust-tinged air, feeling the weight of responsibility balanced with relief, a quiet acknowledgement of the trust placed in him by both Blaze and the man. A soft scuff indicated movement from above, a loose beam settling, and Jason responded instantly, placing a protective hand on the man's back and issuing a low, calm call to Blaze. The dog responded immediately, positioning himself between Jason and the potential hazard, muscles coiled, eyes vigilant, tail low but steady. The man's breathing grew more measured, the faint tremor in his limbs easing as he sensed the harmony of command and instinct around him. Jason took a final glance at the shadows, ensuring the path was clear, then guided the man through the last stretch toward the faint light beyond the warehouse doors. The sun was higher now, casting a warm, golden hue over the dust and debris, illuminating Blaze's sable coat in a soft glow that highlighted every ripple of muscle and the intelligence shining in his amber eyes. Jason felt the tension drain slowly from his shoulders as they reached the threshold, the sound of wind and distant desert birds replacing the echoing emptiness of the warehouse. He knelt beside the man, checking him carefully, brushing off the dust, and offering words of reassurance that seemed to solidify the fragile peace settling over them. Blaze circled once, then rested close, head low, watching over both men with an instinctive vigilance that spoke of loyalty, courage, and the quiet miracles that unfolded when trust and presence met in a moment of need. The man's hand rested briefly on Blaze's head, and Jason's chest swelled with the simple, profound understanding that this small, disciplined animal had guided them both through uncertainty into a place where safety and calm now waited, the desert light bathing them in warmth and the promise of continued life. The desert sun climbed higher, spilling warm light across the cracked concrete outside the warehouse, and Jason Cole guided the man slowly toward his truck parked on the far edge of the lot, Blaze moving at his side with a deliberate, measured pace, each step echoing in the stillness around them. The man's breathing had grown steadier, his eyes tracking the subtle movements of the dog, the way Blaze's ears twitched at every faint sound, every shuffle of debris, signaling caution and care. Jason spoke softly, explaining what he was doing with clear, calm words, grounding the man with a steady presence, while the dog nudged gently at his arm to encourage forward motion. The air smelled of warm metal and desert sage, mixing with the faint scent of dust from the warehouse, and the breeze carried with it a whisper of freedom, a subtle reminder of the world beyond shadow and debris. Jason glanced back once to ensure Blaze was fully attentive, the dog's amber eyes meeting his own, confirming that every detail had been noticed, every hazard accounted for. The man adjusted his posture as they crossed a sun-warmed patch of gravel, and Jason kept a hand lightly resting near his shoulder, a protective and reassuring gesture, while Blaze moved slightly ahead, tail low but steady, guiding them toward the open desert beyond the warehouse. The gravel crunched softly under their feet, punctuating the silence with a rhythm that felt almost meditative, and the shadows of nearby structures stretched long, merging with the golden light that touched the tops of the rusted metal walls. Jason's gaze swept the horizon, noting the subtle contours of distant hills and the faint outline of cacti, grounding himself in the vast, open landscape that promised both challenge and safety. As they approached the truck, Blaze paused briefly to sniff the air, alert to a faint scent of something long left behind, and Jason nodded, acknowledging the dog's keen awareness, understanding that Blaze's instincts were guiding them as much as his own careful planning. The man's hand brushed against the side of the truck, hesitant at first, then firmer, encouraged by Jason's calm tone and the subtle reassurance of Blaze's presence nearby. The heat of the morning sun touched their backs, warming the desert dust that clung to their boots and clothing, and a faint breeze lifted loose strands of Jason's hair, carrying the scent of sun-baked earth and distant wildflowers. He helped the man into the passenger seat, checking that he was comfortable and secure, then climbed into the driver's side, feeling the familiar rhythm of the truck beneath him, the vibrations of the engine a grounding force amidst the residual tension of the rescue. Blaze leapt gracefully into the bed of the truck, settling beside a small blanket Jason had placed, eyes still scanning the horizon, attentive to every subtle shift in light and shadow. The desert stretched endlessly around them, open and vast, a silent witness to the quiet triumph of the morning, and Jason allowed himself a moment to breathe deeply, the crisp air filling his lungs, a mix of relief and gratitude settling over him like a soft mantle. He glanced at Blaze, whose focused gaze remained fixed on the warehouse, ears alert, posture calm but ready, and Jason offered a quiet word of thanks, acknowledging the dog's unwavering loyalty and instinct that had guided them both through uncertainty. The man beside him adjusted slightly, a small smile appearing, tentative but genuine, the tension in his shoulders easing as he recognized the safety they had reached, the stability of the open desert, and the gentle warmth of the sun contrasting sharply with the shadows of the warehouse they had just left. Jason started the engine fully, the low hum merging with the soft whisper of the wind across the desert, and as they began to drive away slowly, he allowed his eyes to scan the horizon, noting the colors shifting subtly with the height of the sun, and the play of light across distant hills and scrub, each moment of motion a reminder that even small steps forward could carry immense meaning. Blaze shifted slightly, resting his head on the edge of the truck bed, eyes still alert but softened by the quiet certainty of the moment, and Jason felt the pulse of shared accomplishment, a silent acknowledgement of the bond between human and dog, the trust that had navigated them through shadow and uncertainty to safety and the promise of continued life. The truck rumbled steadily across the sun-baked desert road, dust rising behind them in gentle swirls that caught the light and danced in the warm morning air. Jason Cole kept his hands firm on the wheel, eyes sweeping the horizon for any signs of obstruction while keeping the man beside him steady, offering quiet words of encouragement that wove a sense of safety into the tense calm that had settled over the group. Blaze's ears twitched at every subtle shift in sound, tail low but moving in gentle sways, alert to the rhythm of the truck and the whispering wind. The man began to relax, shoulders easing, a tentative smile forming as he looked at the dog and then at Jason, understanding in silent acknowledgement the bond that had guided them both through the uncertainty of the warehouse. The desert landscape stretched wide and uninterrupted, shades of ochre and gold blending into distant hills, dotted with sparse vegetation that swayed slightly under the breeze. Jason allowed his gaze to roam briefly over the scene, letting the expansive view fill the quiet spaces in his mind, a contrast to the claustrophobic shadows and dust of the warehouse they had just left. Blaze shifted in the bed of the truck, alert to every vibration, every whisper of movement, signaling the subtle changes in terrain that Jason adjusted for, the tires crunching over gravel and scattered rock. The man beside him let out a slow breath, the tension leaving his chest, eyes reflecting a mix of awe and relief, feeling the warmth of the sun as it climbed higher and touched their skin through the open windows. Jason spoke softly, recounting small observations of the desert, the shifting colors, the faint scent of desert sage carried by the wind, not to distract but to ground the man in the present, creating a rhythm of reassurance with every word. Blaze circled in the bed once, then returned to his vigil, amber eyes scanning the road behind and ahead, the subtle muscles in his shoulders and legs tensing and relaxing in a controlled pattern that spoke of constant readiness. Jason's focus shifted briefly to the man's posture, steadying him with a hand on his shoulder, allowing his presence and the dog's calm assurance to create a bubble of safety around them as they traversed the uneven stretch toward the small town on the horizon. The sunlight grew warmer, painting the desert in muted, golden tones that softened the harsh lines of the gravel and brush, and the air vibrated with the quiet hum of life stirring, distant birds calling to each other across the empty spaces. Jason allowed himself a measured breath, feeling the pulse of the desert, the rhythm of the truck, and the silent communication with Blaze, a language of instinct, trust, and patience that had been forged over countless missions and quiet trials. As they approached a low ridge, the man turned his gaze forward, noticing the rise of rooftops and distant signs of civilization, the hint of a water tower, and a few scattered buildings that suggested safety and assistance within reach. Jason nodded subtly, acknowledging the progress and the small sense of victory it brought, the tension of the morning lifting incrementally with each passing mile. Blaze's movements became slightly more relaxed, though he remained vigilant, a gentle sigh escaping as if he too sensed the promise of calm that awaited them. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of distant pine and sun-warmed asphalt, mingling with the desert dust, a reminder of the spaces beyond the warehouse and the small victories of the morning. Jason glanced down at the man, checking his comfort, and offered another quiet, grounding phrase, a verbal anchor to reinforce the trust that had guided them through shadows, dust, and uncertainty. Blaze let out a soft, reassuring whine, a sound of recognition and pride, and Jason felt the depth of the partnership, the unspoken gratitude between human and dog that had navigated them both through peril and toward a moment of safety and clarity. The truck rolled over a final stretch of rocky gravel, the small town now clearly in view, and the man's expression softened further, the weight of fear replaced by a growing sense of security, while Blaze remained poised, still attentive, embodying the steadfast loyalty and intuition that had defined their journey from the shadows of the warehouse into the bright promise of the desert morning. The small town emerged fully now, buildings casting long, warm shadows across sun-baked streets, and Jason maneuvered the truck carefully toward the open space in front of the local clinic, its whitewashed walls glowing softly in the morning light. Blaze remained poised in the bed of the truck, head low but attentive, ears flicking at every movement of passers-by and the distant hum of early traffic, a quiet sentinel guarding the fragile peace that had followed them from the warehouse. The man beside Jason shifted slightly, muscles relaxing as he caught sight of the familiar clinic sign, the promise of care and rest radiating through his posture, and he let out a small, unsteady breath that Jason mirrored in a silent, empathetic acknowledgement. The desert wind carried the faint scent of blooming sagebrush, mixing with the warmer, slightly metallic aroma of the truck bed, and Jason felt the balance of the natural and built environment soothe the tension that had gripped him for hours. Blaze shifted to his side, patting softly against the mattress blanket Jason had laid out, eyes still scanning the surroundings with the sharp awareness that had guided them safely across the desert expanse. Jason parked the truck carefully, cutting the engine, the sudden stillness making the faint rustle of wind through the desert plants and the distant cry of a bird seem amplified, a soundtrack to the calm that had begun to settle around them. He reached over to help the man out, offering a firm but gentle hand, while Blaze leapt lightly down from the bed, tail low but controlled, circling to sniff and survey every corner of the immediate area before returning to stand alert near the clinic entrance. The man's steps were cautious but deliberate, confidence growing with each movement, supported by Jason's steady presence and Blaze's reassuring proximity. The morning sun rose higher, casting light that glinted off windows and reflected gently on the pavement, bathing the trio in a sense of quiet triumph, a reminder that each deliberate step through uncertainty had led them here. Jason spoke softly, describing small details of the surrounding streets, the subtle scent of blooming flora, the distant sound of a wind chime somewhere in the town, grounding the man in the world around him, creating a rhythm of security and stability that contrasted with the tight shadows and dust of the warehouse. Blaze remained attentive, ears swiveling toward every subtle sound, nose lifting to catch every trace in the air, his posture communicating constant vigilance and calm assurance. Jason guided the man up the small ramp to the clinic entrance, noting the texture of the concrete beneath their boots, the slight unevenness that required careful attention, and the way Blaze paused at intervals to check back, ensuring their safety. Inside, the air was cooler, cleaner, carrying the faint scent of antiseptic and polished floors, a stark but welcoming contrast to the warehouse, and the man's eyes widened with relief, a soft, incredulous smile spreading across his face. Jason adjusted the man's jacket, smoothing the fabric, and whispered a few reassuring words, the soft cadence of his voice reinforcing the trust and calm that had been built over the morning. Blaze padded in after them, settling near a wall where he could observe the new surroundings, ears pricked, tail low, the image of disciplined readiness softened by the knowledge that the immediate danger had passed. The receptionist glanced up, offering a nod of acknowledgement, and Jason moved with quiet efficiency to guide the man to a chair, making sure he was comfortable and positioned safely, while Blaze sat close by, chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, eyes still alert to every movement and sound. Jason allowed a slow, grounding breath, feeling the rhythm of Blaze's presence, the warmth of the sun outside through the windows, and the quiet pulse of life within the clinic, the tension of the warehouse and the desert fading into memory as safety and reassurance filled the space. The man's expression softened further, eyes following the dog with a mixture of awe and gratitude, and Jason felt the depth of the bond that had carried them both through uncertainty and into this quiet sanctuary, the lesson of patience, trust, and vigilance etched into every movement, every glance, every breath shared between human and dog. The clinic room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant murmur of voices in the hall, and Jason Cole sat beside the man, checking a small kit of supplies he had brought with him, while Blaze rested at his feet, ears flicking toward every sound with the same alert precision that had guided them through the warehouse and across the desert. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting stripes of warm light across the linoleum floor, and the man shifted slightly, a hint of color returning to his pale face, eyes reflecting relief and a cautious curiosity as he observed the disciplined dog and the calm, steady Marine. Jason spoke in measured tones, describing the environment, the routine of the clinic, the subtle movements of the staff as they passed by, grounding the man in the sense of normalcy and security that he had lacked for so long. Blaze lifted his head briefly, nose twitching, ears swiveling to catch the faintest scent of the hospital corridor, then settled back down, body relaxed but ready, the tension of the morning giving way to a more controlled alertness. The man's hands fidgeted slightly in his lap, and Jason offered a quiet word, letting him know he was safe, reinforcing the trust that had carried them from uncertainty into this calm space. Through the window, the desert shimmered under the rising sun, the heat beginning to mingle with the cool air of the room, a subtle contrast that seemed to mirror the journey they had taken from danger into safety. Jason allowed himself a slow breath, noting the rhythm of Blaze's chest rising and falling, the soft sound of the man's breathing beginning to even out, and the faint shuffle of shoes in the corridor, a reminder that life outside the shadows continued as it always had, steady and persistent. Blaze nudged the man gently with his nose, eliciting a faint smile, and Jason felt the weight of the morning's trials lighten slightly, the unspoken bond between dog, Marine, and rescued individual radiating a quiet strength that did not need words to be understood. The man's gaze moved from Blaze to Jason, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, gratitude and recognition for the care, attention, and presence that had guided him to safety. Jason adjusted a blanket beneath the man's legs, ensuring comfort, while maintaining a watchful eye on the surroundings, aware that even small details could affect the man's sense of security. The warm light continued to spill across the room, highlighting the subtle textures of walls, furniture, and the fur of Blaze, every detail reinforcing the calm and reassurance now present. Jason's voice remained steady, offering observations, slight encouragements, gentle guidance, each word chosen to build confidence and stability, a counterpoint to the uncertainty they had left behind in the warehouse. Blaze shifted slightly, tail low but still expressive, eyes catching the light in amber flashes, a living symbol of vigilance and loyalty, reinforcing the lesson of the morning that careful attention and instinct could navigate even the most uncertain circumstances. The man's posture improved, shoulders relaxing further, a sense of ease spreading as the safe environment of the clinic enveloped them, and he allowed himself to respond to Jason's soft reassurances, nodding occasionally, a subtle but meaningful gesture. Outside, the desert continued to gleam under the sun, its heat rising in gentle waves, carrying with it the smell of dry earth and distant flora, a reminder of the vast, persistent world beyond the clinic walls. Jason allowed himself a brief glance at the window, appreciating the expansive view, while keeping one hand lightly on the man's arm for support, and Blaze rested his head near the man's feet, eyes still attentive but softened, the tension of the morning fully eased. The air in the room was filled with the quiet rhythm of life returning, the combination of human care, canine vigilance, and a structured environment, creating a sanctuary where relief, trust, and the subtle miracle of safety could unfold naturally, reinforcing the bond forged in the desert and warehouse, now solidified in the warmth and light of the early day. The doctor arrived quietly, a silver-haired woman named Evelyn Hart, her white coat moving like a pale flag in the cool clinic air, and the room seemed to settle around her calm presence. Jason Cole stood at once, not with panic, but with the disciplined respect of a man who understood that help had finally taken its place beside hope. Blaze lifted his head from near the man's feet, ears forward, amber eyes studying the doctor as she entered with a clipboard and a small medical bag. The rescued man watched her with cautious attention, his fingers curled around the edge of the blanket, as if part of him still feared the world might shift again beneath him. Dr. Hart spoke gently, asking his name. For a moment, there was only the soft hum of the air conditioner, the faint click of a hallway door, and the whisper of desert wind brushing the clinic windows. Then the man swallowed and answered in a rough, tired voice. Daniel. Jason repeated it softly, as though returning the name to him in full. Daniel. Not a stranger. Not a shadow in a forgotten building. A person with a name, with breath, with a life still waiting on the other side of fear. Dr. Hart checked him carefully, her movements slow and respectful, never rushing, never making the room feel crowded. She asked simple questions, one at a time, and Daniel answered what he could. His voice trembled at first, then steadied as Blaze rested his chin lightly against the side of the chair. That small weight seemed to anchor him more than any words could. Jason noticed it and said nothing. Some comfort arrives too quietly to be explained. Outside the window, the desert shimmered in the late morning brightness, wide and still, the distant hills blue with heat and distance. Inside, the room smelled faintly of antiseptic, clean cotton, and warm sunlight. Dr. Hart looked at Jason, then at Blaze, then back to Daniel, and her expression softened in a way that told Jason she understood more than she was saying. You were found just in time, she said. Daniel closed his eyes. A single breath left him, slow and uneven, but it was not fear this time. It was release. Jason lowered himself into the chair beside him, elbows resting on his knees, hands folded, the way he sat when waiting for orders that mattered. Blaze shifted closer, pressing one paw against Jason's boot, a silent reminder that the mission was not over just because the door had opened and the sun had come in. Daniel turned his head slightly toward the dog. He heard me, he asked. Jason looked down at Blaze, then back at Daniel. He knew you were there. Daniel's eyes filled with something deeper than gratitude. Wonder, maybe, or the ache of realizing how close he had come to being forgotten. He reached down with a careful hand, and Blaze stayed perfectly still, allowing Daniel's fingers to rest against the thick fur between his ears. The dog's eyes softened. His breathing slowed. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The clinic faded around them, and all that remained was a man pulled back from the edge, a Marine sitting guard beside him, and a German shepherd who had followed a sound too faint for the world to notice. Dr. Hart stepped away to arrange further care, her shoes tapping softly down the hall, and Jason stayed where he was. He listened to the steady rhythm of Daniel's breathing. He listened to Blaze's quiet sigh. He listened to the wind outside moving over the desert like a prayer without words. Daniel opened his eyes again and looked toward the window, where sunlight spilled across the floor in bright, golden bars. "I thought nobody was coming," he whispered. Jason did not answer right away. He let the words settle, because some truths deserved room. Then he said, low and steady, "Somebody was." Blaze lifted his head at the sound of Jason's voice, as if he understood the promise hidden inside it. Daniel's hand remained in the dog's fur, holding on with the fragile strength of someone learning that he was not alone anymore. And in that quiet clinic room, beneath the hum of machines and the warmth of the desert sun, something invisible shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough. A life had been found, a name had been restored, and a dog who trusted what humans could not hear had turned an abandoned mourning into mercy. The late morning sunlight filtered through the clinic windows, turning the dust motes into tiny specks of gold that danced lazily in the warm air, and Jason Cole remained close to Daniel, allowing the quiet rhythm of trust to settle between them. Blaze lay at Jason's feet, ears slightly lifted, eyes glinting with attentiveness as he occasionally shifted to sniff the air, ensuring that every corner of the room remained safe, every potential concern noticed. Daniel's breathing had grown steady, the tension in his shoulders easing as he adjusted the blanket across his lap, fingers brushing lightly against the dog's soft fur, drawing comfort from the steady warmth and presence beside him. Jason's hands rested lightly on his knees, fingers relaxed but ready, as he watched Blaze and Daniel interact, marveling at the seamless communication that had guided them from the darkness of the warehouse into this room of calm and care. The clinic felt quiet and sacred in that moment, the soft hum of the ventilation system blending with the faint rustle of paper and distant voices in the hallway, a background of normalcy that seemed almost miraculous after the morning's uncertainty. Outside, the desert sun shone bright and relentless, the heat rising in gentle waves. But inside the room it was filtered through the glass and blinds, bathing the space in a gentle, warm glow that seemed to pause time for just long enough to allow the heart to catch up with the mind. Jason spoke softly, commenting on the sunlight, the way it moved across the floor, the subtle play of shadows, grounding Daniel further in the sensory reality of safety and calm. Blaze lifted his head to catch Jason's tone, then rested again, chest rising and falling in a slow, measured rhythm that mirrored the man's breathing, a living heartbeat reinforcing the trust and stability they had found together. Daniel's lips curved into a tentative smile, his eyes following the dog's movements, noticing the subtle shift of weight, the alert flicker of the ears, the gentle sigh as Blaze settled back down, each gesture reinforcing the bond that had been forged in moments of tension and uncertainty. Jason glanced at the window, noticing the way sunlight highlighted the edges of the furniture and the pale color of the walls, casting the room in a comforting palette of warmth and serenity, a visual affirmation of the morning's journey from shadow into light. He shifted slightly to offer Daniel a sip of water, steadying the cup in his hands, while Blaze leaned slightly closer, placing a reassuring paw near the man's knee, a silent testament to the companionship that had guided them through peril. The man's fingers curled instinctively around the dog's fur, a small gesture of connection that carried more meaning than words could convey, and Jason felt the deep, quiet satisfaction of a mission fulfilled, not with fanfare, but with the subtle, profound acknowledgement of life saved and trust upheld. The air in the room was warm and filled with the mingling scents of sunlight, fabric, and the faint metallic tang from the clinic, all combining to create a sensory environment that both grounded and soothed, a stark contrast to the harsh, dusty confines of the warehouse they had left behind. Jason's eyes swept over the room one final time, noting every small detail, the position of the chairs, the texture of the blanket, The way Blaze's amber eyes caught the light, and he allowed himself a slow, deliberate breath, appreciating the stillness, the calm, and the unspoken miracle of having brought another life back from uncertainty. Daniel shifted again, looking from Blaze to Jason, and in that silent gaze there was acknowledgement, relief, and a quiet gratitude, the type that does not need words, only presence. The sunlight continued to move across the floor, painting stripes of gold that seemed to stretch infinitely toward the walls. And in that space, Jason, Daniel, and Blaze existed together in the perfect balance of safety, warmth, and shared understanding, a tableau of trust, loyalty, and the subtle, enduring miracle of a life reclaimed. By early afternoon, the clinic had grown quieter, and the desert outside had turned white with heat, the road shimmering beyond the windows as if the whole world were breathing slowly under the sun. Daniel sat upright now, wrapped in the same blanket, his face still tired but no longer distant, while Jason Cole stood near the door with Blaze beside him, watching Dr. Evelyn Hart review the final notes with the calm certainty of someone who had seen many frightened souls find their way back to steadier ground. The room smelled of clean linen, cooled air, and faint desert dust brought in on their boots. And through it all Blaze remained still, his sable coat glowing where the sunlight touched it, his amber eyes moving from Daniel to Jason and back again, as though guarding a promise only he could hear. Daniel looked down at his hands, then toward the window, where a narrow view of the town stretched across the street, a gas station, a diner with a faded red sign, a flag moving gently above the post office. Ordinary things. Beautiful because they were ordinary. He took a slow breath and said, "I kept thinking about the sound outside that building." Jason turned toward him. Daniel swallowed, searching for the words. "I thought it was just the wind at first. Then I heard claws on the floor. I did not know whether to be afraid or grateful." Blaze lifted his head at the sound of Daniel's voice, ears rising with quiet attention. Jason looked at the dog and let a faint smile touch his mouth. He has a way of making that decision for people. Daniel gave a soft laugh, small and fragile, but real enough to change the air in the room. Dr. Hart paused by the doorway, her hand resting lightly on the frame, and her expression softened as if she understood that healing did not always begin with medicine. Sometimes it began with being found. Sometimes it began with a warm nose against a trembling hand. Jason stepped closer to Daniel's chair, his boots quiet against the floor, and offered him the folded note the clinic receptionist had written down from the sheriff's office. A simple confirmation that help had been called, that family had been reached, that nobody would be leaving Daniel alone. Daniel stared at the paper for several seconds before taking it. His fingers shook, but not from fear this time. From the weight of being remembered by the world. "My sister is coming?" he asked. Jason nodded. "She is on her way from Barstow. About 90 miles. She asked me to tell you she is coming as fast as she can." Daniel pressed the paper to his chest and closed his eyes. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of all the words a man cannot say when relief finally reaches the places fear has been holding shut. Blaze rose without command and moved closer, placing his head gently on Daniel's knee. Daniel opened his eyes, looked down, and rested his hand between the dog's ears, his thumb brushing the thick fur with slow, careful strokes. Jason watched them, and for a moment the years on his own shoulders felt lighter. He thought of all the places he had walked with Blaze, all the long roads where trust had been the only map, all the times the dog had stopped him from walking past something that mattered. Today it had been a sound, a scent, a living breath hidden where no one else would have searched. Outside, a church bell rang once from somewhere down the street, low and clear in the dry air. Dr. Hart smiled faintly and stepped back into the hallway, giving the room its peace. Daniel looked at Jason, then at Blaze, and whispered, "Why did he come back for me?" Jason lowered himself into the chair across from him, his eyes steady, his voice quiet. "Because some hearts are trained to notice what the rest of the world misses." Daniel held that answer like a handrail. The sunlight moved slowly across the floor, touching Blaze's paws, then Jason's boots, then the blanket over Daniel's knees, joining them in one warm line. No one needed to speak after that. The morning had already said enough. A deserted road, a forgotten building, a faint sound beneath the wind, and one loyal dog who refused to let silence have the final word. In that small clinic room, With the desert shining outside and the world beginning again, Daniel kept his hand on Blaze's head, as if holding on to the miracle itself. And Jason understood that rescue was not always loud. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it had 4 paws, amber eyes, and the courage to follow mercy into the dark.